Hi folks, hope you're keeping well. We'll be getting started in just a moment, but I wanted to encourage us to get to know each other a little bit better while we're waiting. Last week, Mimi got in the chat and asked everyone to start sharing what their lockdown setup's like. I can see you all buzzing away in the chat now, so I thought I'd take advantage of that as well and ask you to share a few stories. Obviously, we've been, we're all getting used to this new lockdown setup, and if you're anything like us, you might have experienced the odd Zoom or sort of conference call mishap. It'd be great if you're willing to sort of share those stories with us now. And obviously, let's keep it clean. No names, just stories. But to give you a little bit of flavour about that, we've actually been lucky or unlucky, depends how you want to see it, actually, to experience two bizarre sort of Zoom happenings as we've been in meetings and whatnot. The first was actually a pair of feet, believe it or not. We were on a call and we had someone's feet just sort of flapping around in the background, kind of having a bit of a scratch here and there, and it did make it really hard to concentrate. The second was a little bit more unfortunate on who we were on the phone to. The person was enjoying a nice call in the garden, but had clearly forgotten that the washing was in the background. And we all got a nice little look at their afternoon wash and load. I won't dig into specifics, but I'll let your imagination run wild there. It'd be great to see what any happenings you've come across while you've been on calls, meetings, whatnot. If there's any been funny goings on, bizarre goings on, or just downright weird, pop it in the chat. Let us know where you're coming from. Let us know where you're joining from, and let's share some stories. Hope to see some soon. Sean, great to have you with us from Colchester, interested in fundraising, particularly during times of COVID and beyond. So definitely think you're in the right place today. We've got some great guests, and we're going to be digging in a lot of that, specifically from an event point of view. John and Joseph, great to have you with us today as well from the Highlands in Inverness. That's far away. Hope you're keeping well up there. Richard, good to have you with us, as well as Sarah from Adoption Matters. Coming in thick and fast. Sorry, can I keep up with you all? Lucy from Navca in not so sunny Sheffield. Safe to say, I think that's resonating with the whole of the country at the minute. I think I've just seen the first few drops of rain on my window, actually. Heather from Highlights in Cumbria, so that's up by my way, other side of the country, but up that way. Great to have you. Oh, Pete from sunny Suffolk. So you are rubbing it in. We're raining everywhere else, but glad to see it's sunny where you are, Pete. Great to have you. It looks like everyone is here now, and please do carry on and keep introducing yourselves within the chat. It's great to see you so active. But we will dig in. For those of you just joining on as new or returning users, I'm Chris Hall, and welcome to another Charity Digital Remote Webinar Day. I hope you're all keeping well. As you may or may not know, we have our next Be More Digital event installment coming up in a week's time. And the event is focused on all things digital leadership. And I wanted to spend a quick minute just telling you why you should join us then. With the impact of COVID and the great work of the Black Lives Matter movement in the last few weeks and months and years beyond, it's now kind of more important than ever to be challenging how we run and operate our organizations. Our virtual day aims to share how charities can be more digitally driven, be more inclusive, and be more resilient as we move forward into the new normal. But what's it all about? Well, we've 16 hand-picked charities and tech experts who are going to be running 10 sessions across 2 streams. And we'll be covering key topics like digital strategy, service delivery, digital culture, data, and more. And you'll be having the chance, a lot like with our webinars, to engage directly with the experts through interactive sessions and live Q&As like today will be. The event is totally free to all charity professionals, and you can access the day from pretty much anywhere with a device and an internet connection. So even up there in Inverness, you'll be able to join us. We believe that leaders can be found at any level of an organisation, and it's really never too early or too late even to start learning more about digital leadership and all the great things that come with it. And yes, it may be virtual, but we believe we've cracked a good way of being able to network all virtually. We'll be following this sort of day with a new take on networking, drinks optional, but more will be shared on that at a later time. If you do want to learn more and sign up, you can do so by heading over to the web address on the screen or by clicking the link that our esteemed producers will be popping into the chat now. And when you've done so, don't forget to reach out to us on Twitter. Tell us you're coming with a hashtag #BeMoreDigital. Anyways, on to what you're all here for today. Is a lot of people in the chat are saying they're here to know about fundraising and events. And we do have a great webinar lined up for you today. You know, we've all felt the impact of COVID in some way, shape or form. You know, staff have been furloughed, events have been cancelled, and charities are looking for solutions to offset those fundraising shortfalls. But now, you know, it's about recovery and it's about resilience. And the shift to virtual events can and has been proven to provide both short and long-term solutions to most, if not all, of these challenges. So today, we welcome good friends of ours, RD Mobile. They actually provided the event app for our Be More Digital conference back in March, if you were there with us. And they've also supplied, you know, event apps to hundreds of other events across the world as well. So to say they know a thing or two about events will be doing them an injustice. Their president, Katie Atkinson, joins us today from the US to share some fantastic examples of how charities stateside are adapting to the virtual world and how us in the UK can follow suit and create virtual fundraiser events that engage supporters, expand reach globally, and, you know, exceed your fundraising goals. But before I hand over to Katie, I would be remiss not to remind you all of the house rules. I'm sure you all know them really, really well by now. First of all, recording forgiveness. You know, we're still doing this remotely. If we do happen to have any sort of connection issues, we will work through it. We'll own it. We'll call it out and we'll crack on. Continue the chat in the group. It's there to connect with each other, ask questions of each other, talk to each other, and of you know, myself and whoever's listening on the end of the chat. We do host a Q&A session at the end of each session, so we'll dedicate at least 20 minutes, if not more, to that. You can submit a question separately to submitting something in the chat box. So about 4 or 5 spaces along to the right of the chat button is the Q&A button. If you wish to ask a question, or have your question answered, please pop your question in there. Make sure, you know, keeps them nice and concise for us to read out, and we'll do our very, very, very best to get them answered for you. Last of all, resources. With every webinar we do record it, and we do send the recording along with the slides out to you within a week of the webinar happening. As time's gone on, we've got better at this, so hopefully it'll be with you in the next sort of few days. But keep an eye out for it. We'll send an email after with all the resources that are covered in the webinar, not just the recording and slides. Excuse me. Well, that's enough from me for now. Thrilled to hand you over to Katie. Katie, welcome. It's absolutely delightful to have you with us.
Thanks, and thank you all for joining us today. We wanted to start off with a short poll just to get a sense for where you all are with your events, with your fundraising efforts. You should see up on your screen a question. What is your interest in virtual events? Tick 1 or more. And just wanted to get a sense for where you are in your thinking going now and going forward with your fundraising efforts. So if you'd please tick as many as apply and submit, and then we will share the results. Okay, so thank you all for submitting. It looks like we're in different places. I think that many of you recognize that virtual events do present new opportunities going forward. And we're going to talk about that today. And we're going to talk about what organizations in the US are doing, which is in many ways different from what's happening in the UK. So let's go ahead and get started and take a look at our agenda. As I said, things are a little different here in the US. I am the president of RD Mobile, and our organization works with charities and membership organizations in the US, in the UK, and Europe. We're based outside of Washington, DC. And in talking with our friends over in the UK about charity fundraising efforts and the charity sector right now, we're finding that there are a lot of things going on, obviously, with furloughs and et cetera. We're going to talk about what the charity sector looks like in the UK right now, what it looks like in the US. We're going to talk about what the future of events looks like. We're going to show and talk about some success stories here in the US, as far as fundraising efforts and virtual events, and then talk about what emerging best practices we're seeing. And I think for all of us, this really is a time of great innovation. A lot of best practices really are happening as we speak. The last few months have made all of us pivot pretty rapidly. And what's exciting about that is that we've seen a lot of innovations. We've seen a lot of organizations taking chances and finding that they're rewarded because of those chances. So we'll talk about those lessons learned, and then we'll turn to Q&A. So what does the charity sector look like right now in the UK versus the US? So as I talk to our friends over in the UK, I'm hearing that staff are being furloughed, that charity shops are closed, that fundraising events have all but come to a standstill. And what's different here in the US is that staff furloughing is not as common here. So we do have charities and organizations still operating, but they are limited right now as far as what they can do. We don't have as many charity shops as you do. We do, for instance, right across from my office, we do have a thrift shop that benefits the local hospital. And yes, they've been closed, but for the most part, charities are finding their funding in a number of different areas. So charity shops are not as big a thing here in the US. Obviously, fundraising events are, and what we're seeing is that charities are taking chances. They are looking at what they can do and what they can do quickly to pivot to virtual events. So I'll talk a little bit about what the charity sector in the US looks like. There is an organization called Giving Tuesday, and I know that they started here in the US, in New York, and now have groups around the world, including in the UK. And this is an organization that does a Giving Tuesday. It's an annual event. And the idea is to bring together people who want to support charities and donate to them with organizations that are looking for support and supporters. So they do a one-day event. It has been a wildly successful event. This year, it happened to fall on May the 5th. And obviously that's in the middle of the pandemic. What the Giving Tuesday folks found is that they had almost the same amount of donations online through Giving Tuesday in 2020 than they had last year. So there is some hope, and there are people that want to support charities out there, and the Giving Tuesday organization found that. Here in my local area, there's an organization called Spring to Action. I'm in Alexandria, Virginia, which is right outside of Washington, DC. And the Spring to Action is an annual giving day here in Alexandria. And again, like Giving Tuesday, the organization connects different local charities with people who want to give. What happens is a lot of the promotion of this event is through social media, through grassroots outreach on behalf of different organizations. But the Spring to Action group is basically a clearinghouse for those organizations, and will connect donors with local charities. So for instance, if you want to search for an organization that supports seniors, you can go to a website, search for what types of organizations you want to service and support, and you can find those organizations. You can find a profile page of the organization, and then you can make those donations. So for instance, I have a friend who runs an organization called At Home in Alexandria. On the Spring to Action Day, which was April the 15th this year, she and her grassroots supporters got out there on social media, got out there on email, and sent around messaging saying, today is Spring to Action, come support our organization, go to this website, and you can support us. And what we've found with this organization, At Home in Alexandria, as well as others, is that the giving has been very successful this year. People, again, continue to want to support these organizations. And Spring to Action uses an organization called givegab.com to run their website. So for the organizations themselves, they just have to maintain their profile pages, and then the fundraising and the donations, et cetera, all happen online through the website. So we are seeing some successes here in the UK, or in the US. So going forward, many of you are challenged with what to do with your events. You've been participating most likely on Zooms. We all have been. And as far as events going forward, there's no doubt that they're going to be different. There's no question that the way we've been doing things to date is going to change. It's already changing. So what do we have to look forward to going forward? What we have seen during this time is that this has been a great time of innovation, that organizations are looking at how they can do things differently. They're taking chances. And what they've found through that, and I see this with charities as well as membership organizations, is that by taking these chances, by looking at virtual events, that these organizations are not only succeeding, but they're expanding their reach, in many cases globally, where they might have had just a local presence. They're finding new revenue sources, and they're finding new supporters. So there is a lot of excitement there. What many organizations are doing is leveraging the tools that they already have and they already use, and what their supporters already have and already use. And those things might be Zoom, Facebook Live, YouTube, Vimeo. What supporters are looking to do is really connect with your organizations, and they want to be a part of what you're doing and be supporters for your efforts. An example of the eagerness that we see just with our organization is we typically host monthly meetings. This was mid-May. We host monthly meetings where we bring together different nonprofit professionals on a monthly basis, and we usually have an in-person gathering where we talk about a particular topic. When we were hosting those in-person events prior to the middle of March, we were seeing about 20 people show up for those events. In April, we decided to take those events virtual, and lo and behold, our 20 people who would gather for these local events became 240 people from around the country who wanted to participate. And we even had people from the UK who wanted to participate. So we hosted our first successful virtual, what we call coffee talk, in the middle of April, and had, as I said, 240 people from across the globe actually participating in that, where it used to be 20 people locally. How we managed that is we used Zoom meeting, and we brought everyone together at the beginning to explain the idea, what we were going to be doing. And then we split into 6 different breakout rooms and hosted discussions in those different breakout rooms. So we had someone facilitating each of the different breakout rooms. It was wildly successful. We had lots of great response to it, and we continue to host those on a monthly basis now. and have been really excited and very encouraged to see the results of those efforts. So as far as planning for virtual events, what does that mean for you as an organization? I think that many organizations, again, here in the US have had to move very quickly. What they've done has really been largely dependent on several factors. How much time do they have to make this switch from an in-person event to a virtual event? What technologies do they have available? What sorts of money do they have to run a virtual event? What are expectations for their participants, and what are their revenue expectations? There are really dozens of platforms out there for running virtual events. If you Google virtual event platforms, you'll just come up with pages and pages and pages of options. You might have heard of some. You might have participated in some virtual events yourself. What is best for your organization really depends on the factors here. And I would say largely budget drives a lot of that. Budget and time to launch. Do you have the money to go out and purchase it or license a platform to run your virtual events? Or is it good enough to use the tools that are already available to you? Those might be, again, Zoom, Facebook Live, and others. Do you want to have a web-based experience where people are participating via their laptop experience? Do you want to have a mobile experience where they're participating via their mobile device? Or do you want to have a hybrid where you might have an event that takes place over the course of a day or several days even? And do you want to give your supporters the flexibility to participate on their desktop, to participate on their mobile device, to sit out in the garden and participate? Those are all different considerations. So I'm going to tell you about two different organizations that I'm familiar with and that we work with here in the US. One is Johns Hopkins University. The other is the Mattie Miracle Cancer Foundation. Each is a little bit different. They each had events planned for pretty much the same time, and each had to move very, very quickly to shift to a virtual event. And this was not something they had to do. But in the case of the Mattie Miracle Cancer Foundation, it was something that they felt very strongly they had to do quickly. And not only was their annual walk, that it's their biggest fundraiser every year. So they just felt that this had to be something that they took virtual because of the money that they were dependent on raising through this event. So we'll start with Johns Hopkins University. Johns Hopkins is located in Baltimore, Maryland, which is about an hour away from where I am now. They have an annual alumni weekend where alumni from the university come back to the campus. They usually have about 8,000 alumni and families come back to Baltimore. And really the goal of this is to bring alumni back to the school, to the campus, get them excited about what the university is doing, have them reminisce with their friends about what their college and university experience meant to them. And that translates into giving to the university. Their original event was planned for April 24th to the 26th. It's a 3-day event usually. And in late March, they realized that this April 24th to 26th event was not going to happen. They made the decision that they were going to go virtual in about the middle of April. And then they rescheduled the alumni weekend as a virtual weekend, May the 14th to the 17th. They had 3 staff who worked primarily on the shift to digital, to virtual. They did include a lot of different volunteers in doing this. The event was, as an in-person event, going to be about, I think, 130 different activities going on. And they shifted dramatically, obviously, going virtual, and scaled that back down to 35 events. As the plans changed, this took place over about 3.5 weeks. They decided that they were going to go forward with this. They were going to take a chance on it. They contracted my company, RD Mobile, to help make this happen. So they had not only a desktop experience for their event, they had a mobile app as well. So the different activities that were happening during their virtual weekend could be streamed on a mobile device or streamed on a desktop device. What's particularly notable is that the staff at Johns Hopkins, at the Alumni Association, built everything themselves. They put all the content into to the platform. They turned it around in 2 weeks. They launched the registration for the event about 9 days before it happened. Typically, they're out for up to 4 months promoting their in-person alumni weekend. In this case, they had basically 9 days to promote it and gather registrations for it. So whereas they normally would have 8,000 people attending in person, and having promoted that over the course of about 3 to 4 months, they now had about 1,200 people who expressed interest and registered for the event in a period of 9 days, which I think is actually pretty remarkable, considering the shift that was happening in the country with their alumni and with their organization. So 1,200 downloads, and those participants, those supporters, were participating on their mobile devices as well as their desktops. What Johns Hopkins used to run their event, so they had, as I said, they had about 300, they went from about 130 in-person events to 35 virtual events. As part of the registration, they included a donation opportunity. What they found, which is actually, again, quite exciting, the numbers weren't huge as far as donations, but what they gathered within the 9 days of registration and then the 3 days of the event was the same that they would normally gather in a 4-month period through their fundraising efforts and their reunion promotion efforts for an in-person event. Some of the fun things that they did, and they purposely, in turning this into a virtual event, purposely said, what can we do that's gonna be engaging to our alumni and our supporters? So they incorporated fun things like cooking demonstrations. They did cocktail demonstrations and shared the recipes for the cocktails and the food that they were demonstrating. They hosted memorable sports moments from history. Johns Hopkins is very well known for their lacrosse program, so university alumni are very supportive of Johns Hopkins lacrosse. So they replayed a national award-winning lacrosse video, and then did an online chat afterwards of people calling in or participating to recall their time at the university and their recollection of the event itself. They did throwback photos They did a contest where you could share your photos from before and your photos now. And those were all things that really engaged the alumni, got them excited about participating. And it really turned out to be a big success for them, given the very short amount of time that they had to pull this together. They had a team of 3 who ran the virtual event, one who was the host for different sessions that they had, whether it was a cooking demonstration, whether it was a Meet the Dean discussion, whether it was live streaming of a concert that they had on Facebook Live. And then they had 2 other staff who were helping with recording the videos that were done on Zoom, taking care of any security issues, and helping if they did breakout discussions. They did this with 3 people with very little time to put it together. And they did do some events as live events, and then they did do some as pre-recorded. The pre-recorded events, they actually live streamed. So for instance, they did a live stream of a concert, but they did it on Facebook Live. So as alumni participated in the concert, it actually seemed like it was a live experience because it was on Facebook Live. You could see people commenting during the concert. You could see them, liking it, etc., as things were going on and participating with one another. So it was a shared experience for them, even though the recording itself had been done ahead of time. There was no charge for the Johns Hopkins Alumni Weekend. As I said, that they got donations in the 9 days leading up to the event that were the same amount as they get for when they did their in-person event and promoted it for 3 to 4 months in advance. Many of the donations that they had were designated actually for COVID, for a COVID fund. So when they came in to do their donations, they were able to choose how they wanted to designate those funds. One thing that was particularly notable and a big surprise to the Hopkins alumni team was that they had different 5-year reunion groups who were participating. What they found is that the older alumni were the most engaged in the alumni weekend. So for instance, they had a 50-year reunion class that participated that had the highest number of people who participated in the weekend, which was counter, I think, to what they were thinking. And the reverse happened, that their younger alumni were not as engaged. So for Johns Hopkins, what was great about that is the older alumni were participating in greater numbers, and they're the ones who actually had the money to donate to the university. So it was very, very successful in that regard. So let's move on to another organization. And this is one that's very close to me. It's the Mattie Miracle Cancer Foundation. This is an organization that supports families who have children who are undergoing cancer treatment. It's close to me because I've been involved as a committee member and supporter of the organization for the 11 years that it's been around. The founders of the organization lost their only child to bone cancer at the age of 7. And he was actually my son's best friend back in nursery school. So I've been very, very involved with this organization, very supportive of it. And what they do is they support families, they provide psychosocial standards. They work with a number of different medical organizations to work with hospitals. They support child life specialists at several different local hospitals to help children and families who are hospitalized while they're undergoing cancer treatment. Their big event every year is an annual walk and family festival. They started this 11 years ago, and it's grown in scope and size and fundraising over the years. It requires, as an in-person event, just hordes and hordes of volunteers. They're volunteers that put together, that gather donations of food and drinks and raffle prizes and so forth. The actual festival includes different tents for crafts and activities. They have blow-up jumping castles. They have different amusement rides. And along with that, they do a walk around a track. They need to get permits for this event. They need to get security. They need to rent different things, including tents. They need to get insurance. They need to get permits from the city. So in putting together this annual event, it's very labor intensive. 2 months before the event was supposed to happen, which was on May the 17th, the city of Alexandria pulled their permits and said, you're not going to be able to do the event this year. It was not a surprise to the organizers, but they were faced with a challenge. This is their biggest fundraising event every year. And how were they going to raise the money that they needed to support these different efforts that they were doing? The organizers decided pretty quickly that they wanted to make this a virtual event. They didn't know what that was going to look like, so they went out and asked their committee members and said, what do you think we could do to make this a success as a virtual event? So they gathered their closest supporters and came up with the idea of doing a virtual walk and not doing the festival. What was so exciting about the shift to a virtual walk is that they, through grassroots support, gathered competitive walk teams together. They reached out and said, let's do a challenge across all 50 US states. And let's get someone who can participate from every different state in the US. Whereas virtual, in person, this was always just a local Washington, DC event. They, reached out and found that they had supporters all over the country. So they were able to get folks to participate from all 50 states. They also were able to get people to participate in 8 different countries. So this was never something that they had ever been able to succeed at previously. By going virtual, they expanded beyond their wildest dreams at a time where we were in a global pandemic when many communities were shut down. They were able to put on a virtual walk that exceeded their fundraising efforts and their fundraising goals. What they did as far as the communication and how they ran this event was they went out on social media very aggressively. They had their supporters get out there and talk about this 50-state challenge. They organized an event that was going to be really the same day, the same time period as their normal in-person event. So it was a 3-hour period that they ran their event. But what they found was that people were able to participate all over the world. And it didn't really matter whether it was that 3-hour period that they were participating or not. What they did was had folks send in photos of themselves walking. They had people send in their step counts for different walks that they were doing in their own neighborhoods and their own communities. The event itself included technology that they used was their website, which was to gather donations. They used Facebook Live to introduce the idea of the virtual event, to welcome people, to talk about how it would work. They came back on later in the morning to do a live raffle drawing for different raffle prizes. And then they made an announcement about who had the most steps. So the participants, instead of walking around a track and being at a festival, were spread across the globe. And what they did was they took pictures of themselves and sent them in via Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and shared those with the organizers. And as I said, they exceeded their donation goals. They exceeded the number of people who were participating. Typically at the in-person event, they have around 300 participants at the Family Festival and Walk. This year they had 500 donations. They had 415 registered participants. As I said, they had participation from all 50 states and 8 countries, and they had 1.5 million steps taken by the people who were tracking their steps. So the big win for the Mattie Miracle Cancer Foundation was the very quick shift that they were able to make this event a success and to exceed their fundraising goals. Whereas they had been known mostly locally in the Washington, D.C. area, now they're known globally. Here I am talking to charities in the UK about them. They did not have the expenses that they had for the Family Festival. And that's something that this was kind of a pivotal year for this organization, because many of their supporters were families and friends of the founders and the young man that the organization's named for. We were all friends when our children were in nursery school. Now our children are all going off to college at the end, after this year. So this was a time where this organization was going to need to really look long and hard at what they were going to do with this event, because their key supporters were going to be moving on in many cases. So this was a huge success and a huge win for them. They have now taken a look at their numbers. They did not have to have the hordes of volunteers that they normally had to run the Family Festival. They had the 2 founders ran the virtual walk. They did have committee members and others who reached out with grassroots efforts on social media, on email, but the manpower that they normally had for the Family Festival, they didn't have to do that. They didn't have to rent tents. They didn't have to get permits. They didn't have to get insurance. So there were huge cost savings for them in putting on the event virtually. And the exciting thing going forward is that they've very seriously considered that this will be the first of many virtual events that they're going to run, that the limitations that they had with the in-person event are not limitations anymore. So they can do this virtually, and they can do it with very few staff. using volunteers to help get the word out at a grassroots level. That's how they're going to move forward with this event in the future. So what does the future of events look like? What are the lessons learned? What are the best practices? And I will say that for all of us, these are emerging best practices. It's really been a lot of trial and error. I think that there have been some really exciting things that have happened. But the things that we've learned and we've seen being successful really are about looking at your event and not trying to replicate it, an in-person event online or as a virtual event. It doesn't work. You need to consider the technology. You need to consider the supporters and what is going to be a success for them. And in many cases, that's activities and efforts that are shared experiences, because these supporters want to support your organization. They want to come together with one another. They want to engage with you, and they want to do it in a way that might be fun. The organizations that I just talked about, Johns Hopkins and Mattie Miracle Cancer Foundation, both leveraged technologies that they already had. And so it didn't involve huge outlays of expense for new technologies. In the case of Johns Hopkins, they had already licensed our mobile app, so that helped them with the experience. They also found that virtual does not mean impersonal. They were finding that both organizations were finding this was a way to reach out in a way that connected them actually with greater numbers of supporters in a way that they were able to do it in actually a fairly personal way, despite the distance, despite the fact that they weren't in the same place at the same time. The exciting things are really about taking new opportunities and turning them into new ways of looking at your events, turn them into ways to re-engage with your current supporters, but reach out and find new opportunities and new supporters. And in the case of Johns Hopkins, again, I mentioned that they found that they had even more engagement from their older participants, and that was a huge surprise to them. So those are some of the best practices that are emerging that we're seeing. There are lots of opportunities out there and available to you, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. I know there have been some questions coming in through the Q&A, and I'm happy to turn things back to Chris if you have questions that you would like me to answer on behalf of the participants today.
Amazing stuff. Thank you very much, Katie. First of all, I know it's super early where you are, so really, really appreciate your time and for an amazing delivery of a really, really insightful webinar, as expected. One thing that really resonates with us at Charity Digital, I think you touched on it quite a lot, is just try and be brave. And I think that's what we've pushed through quite a lot in our communications, as well as we've been talking about fundraising and service delivery, which have been the two main things the charity needs to focus on in what has been, this weird sort of time of disruption and adoption, essentially. And it's great to see so many people do that, and so many people asking questions and willing to take that on is great to see. We have plenty of questions coming in, and it's great to see you also active in the chat and bouncing off each other. If you do want to submit a question, go ahead and hit the Q&A button. I think it's center right on Zoom, or it is for me. Apologies if it's not for you. Hit that, add a question, and we'll do our very, very best to get around to it. I do want to just quickly flag, before we dive into the Q&A, we did ask a question at the start about who had seen some fun or interesting things on Zoom as they were sort of going through meetings, and there was two that I missed in the sort of warm-up. One was a cat. They've had a cat come in and check out some Zoom meeting, and the other was a half-nude husband. So it's not just us that the weird and wonderful happens to. It's good to see it happens to you all as well. Brilliant stuff. So let's dive into some questions, shall we? I do want to flag the first one from Paul, because this is the one that's really been causing a lot of activation in the chat, and just want to make sure everybody's seen it if they've not. Paul asked, what virtual events have people been doing here in the UK, and how successful have they been? Katie, feel free to add some flavour to that if you want, but of course this is one that's been going off in the chat. It would be great for people to keep adding in and answering that question in the chat as we go along.
Well, I would actually love to hear that myself, because when I did start working with Charity Digital on this webinar and what would it look like, I was reaching out to a lot of our own charity customers and others in the sector. And what I was finding is that there weren't a lot of stories out there. I was having a hard time finding organizations that were doing virtual events, which is how we came to talk about these organizations today that we're working with in the US. So I'd actually be curious, Chris, what you're finding in the chat and what you're finding in the sector there at Charity Digital.
Absolutely. So Jill Kirkham, apologies if I've miscorrected that, responded that they're just planning their very first charity celebrity quiz night. I'm trying to think. She goes on to say that they're excited and kind of nervous at the same time. They want it to be high quality, with having 6 celebrities asking and answering pre-recorded questions, and a couple of them are going to be quite high profile. So that's actually a new one we haven't seen before. So that's an interesting take, of course, if you have the ability to be able to do that. Lucy Martin has responded as well. Lucy's a regular webinar listener, so good to have you back with us. Our best has been a simple Facebook interaction session for members, although visible to anyone interested. Various resources and videos shared over 2 hours, with chats initiated and specialists on hand to answer member questions live. Excuse me. They focused on supporting members and growing engagement with social media rather than fundraising for the particular event. So it's another interesting take on it. Trying to see if there's any more. I'll keep looking. Well, off the top of my head, what we're seeing is quite a lot is the onus is actually coming on, is falling onto donors quite a lot. So we're seeing donors be really, really creative on behalf of their charities. So, we obviously had the likes of the Ice Bucket Challenge and that we experienced way back when. But there's been more what we call UGC, user generated content, in that sense, where donors have their charities and they find interesting ways to do it, whether it's cycling the length of Ride London, even though Ride London isn't happening anymore. Captain Tom walking around his garden as many times as he possibly can to raise money for the NHS. It's it's about, a lot of it's about igniting that audience that's out there willing to give the money. Because the activation events that were once planned, the marathons, the bike rides, the events that are no longer possible, they've still got that income that they're still willing to spend. So I don't know if it's a mix of putting on the right event or just tapping into that audience who will do the event for you. Bringing donors into your fold and having them tell your story is always a great way in form of webinar or podcast or something like that. So,
what we're finding is that, and for those of you who might be a little anxious or a little hesitant to do this, is that we found that supporters are very eager to engage at this time. And they're very forgiving. It doesn't, what you put together does not have to be perfect. They all recognize that you're taking a chance. They recognize that you are learning this as you go along, just as we all are. So you do get a lot of credit for taking that chance, and the supporters will be forgiving if everything doesn't go perfectly. What we're also finding is that you can't communicate enough about what you're doing. The social media has just been hugely successful. Grassroots efforts have been hugely successful. So getting out there on social media, getting out there via your email, you just can't communicate enough about what you're doing, and people are very eager to participate.
Yeah, the chat's lighting up now, all about the physical, the virtual walks, runs, cycles. Helen Mee from Florence Nightingale Hospice just said they use Facebook and Strava to create a sense of community to do a walk on Florence Nightingale's birthday. You know, everyone's miles counted towards the total, and people are encouraged to get sponsorship and raise money on their own. Great use of great example of tapping into that, you know, collective audience who are willing and eager to participate, essentially. Simon comes with a Europe-wide conference in April with the idea of training and educating our leaders and potential leaders. The breakout sessions were very popular for short discussions, and applications are being taught. Not a fundraiser, but a really good conference with much wider reach than we could have hoped for, and much to follow up on. Yeah, Simon, we're going through that at the minute, obviously, as a more infrastructure organisation. We're just about to embark on our sort of virtual conference in a week's time today. So we're going to flirt with new ideas of networking where we can, you know, have that in-person feel, but with a digital angle.
Yeah, so we didn't talk about training or conferences today, but those are also things that we have been very involved with recently on behalf of a number of our customers. And the lessons that we're hearing there are that live sessions have been much more popular and successful. That breakout groups, if you're able to do those with small discussions with panelists and so forth, have been very, very successful. The participants really do need guidance about the technology, even if your supporters or your group have been participating in Zooms. You need to communicate how to participate in your virtual conference or training session, because inevitably they're going to come in at the last minute and say, I can't get onto this, I can't participate. So you just have to over communicate about the technology and how to participate. That we've found that over and over again. So those are some thoughts from this side of the pond.
100%. No, they're great. Another thing I just thought of is what we've seen a lot of sort of art charities, museums, heritage charities do is sort of the virtual tour as well, yeah. Virtual play, virtual sort of interaction as well. A lot there, you know, and then soliciting donations for people to involve in that as well. So depending on what services you delivery might be able to sort of incorporate, change the way you want to fundraise as well. There's a lot to be said for taking from the sort of commercial sector and how they operate as well. Secret Cinema is a great one to show how they do a predominantly outdoor sort of business model service, as you will, but they have managed to stay, you know, fluid throughout lockdown by having virtual parties, virtual screenings. I just got an email this morning about going down to good old racetrack and having a social distance, you know, the good old American drive-in theatre style stuff. So there's ways, it's about, you know, having that sort of creative working groups, thinking outside the box a little bit, and talking to your donors more than anything. They'll give you ideas if you just engage with them. Communicate. It's your point, Katie. I know I've only answered one question, and we've hit 2:00. Is it all right for you if we just keep going, Katie, and just keep plowing on?
I'm fine to stay on as long as you want to. Sure.
Magic. We will crack on with some more questions then. First of all, from Molly and Jordan Hart, can anyone share their experience around ticket main in country versus non-ticket events, encouraging donation as a mainstream? I don't know if this might be one better for the group and for the chat box.
I can offer that several of the organizations that we work with have been not doing ticketed virtual events but have opened that up to pay what you feel you'd like to contribute to this.
Yeah.
And have had good numbers with that. It is a little risky, they realize that, you know, this is all new for everybody, but they have had success with pay what you feel you'd like to pay.
That's a really good idea. And actually, Marlene, I saw a really good strand on this. I think it might have been yesterday or the day before in the third sector PR and comms group on Facebook. Someone pretty much answered that same question, and it had a very varied very sort of response rate to it in terms of what people were doing, and had some great ideas. Might be one checking out if you're not a member of that group. Fairly easy to get involved in. But yeah, it kind of comes back to talking to your audience, I guess, and the fact that they're willing to participate and willing to donate more so than ever. So maybe tap into that core user base as your sort of key donors for that event, and then open it up to a wider audience as well. Thanks for that great answer, Katie. Thank you. For a question from Ali. The obvious downside of any virtual, I've lost it. The obvious downside of any virtual event is a lack of direct engagement. How do you build empathy and engagement with the cause after your virtual events? How do you keep engagement going?
Well, actually, that's an interesting question, and it's one that both Johns Hopkins and Mattie Miracle Cancer Foundation have leveraged their events to extend that engagement after the fact. So a lot of that has happened on social media. In the case of Johns Hopkins, they've posted their session videos, and they're seeing very high numbers of people who are accessing the session videos on YouTube after the fact, and that's leading to more donations. And even though the engagement isn't happening during their, you know, it's happened after their actual event, they are getting that participation after the fact, and they're extending that event and extending that engagement. And the Mattie Miracle Cancer Foundation, it's the same thing, is that people are still contributing photos from, you know, a month later. They're still engaging with the organization a month later. So I think it really depends on how you want to define engagement. I think engagement really is, in many cases, it's mobilizing people to action. And it can be done during your virtual event. It can be done before and after as well. And you can extend that engagement.
Good. Thank you very much for that. Really, really appreciate it. On John Hopkins, Andrew Batley asked, what platform did John Hopkins use for their event?
They actually used an RD mobile platform. And I'm happy, if you want to talk later about it, I'm happy to talk to you about that. And that helped them to manage all of their sessions, and have participants be either on their mobile device or on their desktop.
Great, thank you for that. Beth Hillier also asks, the event that Matty Matt has hosted on Facebook, was this a private group event that they set up for the registered walkers only, or did they host the event live on the main Facebook page? They
hosted it live on Facebook, on the main Facebook. They did have the website is where the donations can happen, but the actual event, they streamed live their opening greeting, they streamed the raffle drawings, and they had taken raffle donations for different raffle items through their website. So these were things, the website had already been set up for their in-person event ahead of time anyway, so they just used that for the virtual event as well. But then they did do the live streaming of different parts of the day through Facebook Live, and it was open.
Yeah, catch-all type model. Yeah, that sounds great. Paul follows up with a question: are there any specific software or web apps, I bet you know one, you could recommend for hosting virtual events, and how much do they generally cost?
Well, I am happy to talk with you afterwards, but I'd say that it depends on what you want to do, how many events you want to run, how many participants, but you could start, you know, as low as $1,000 and up for a mobile app.
Great, yeah, Paul and whoever else would like to get in touch with Katie afterwards, there will be a a way to contact you on the screen, I believe, at the end. And if not, you can always reach through us or to direct.
And I will say some of the variables might include, if you want to integrate with Eventbrite, because I know that's a big source of registrations and so forth. Those are things that we've done on a regular basis, is integrated with Eventbrite.
Magic. As we know firsthand, we use that exact integration for our conference. Question from Sarah. She's curious to what people have found the best way to promote new online events. Some of the examples she's seen so far are moving well-established offline events with existing engagement to an online space. But what if there isn't already that kind of established awareness or engagement? How have organizations managed to promote and establish their new fundraising events? She's specifically curious about people's experiences on the promotional side, best promotional practices, what are people seeing as the best channels using, and so on and so forth.
Again, on our side, we're seeing a lot of grassroots efforts from volunteers who are just reaching out very, very, very often and frequently on social media, via personal outreach to their own networks and their own communities, via email. That it's just, it gets the word out. That's what we've seen, and messaging. From
our point of view, Sarah, I think it's there's a lot of different ways. Treat it like any sort of traditional growth that you would in a physical space. So if you want to launch any new product, service, event kind of fits into that category as well. It's always good to have a good, clear marketing plan, goals outlined, a structure of how you're going to achieve it, and what sort of levels and times you're going to evaluate that and change it and iterate as you need to. You've got plenty of channels at your disposal. I think they're all buzzing quite heavily at the minute. More people are online than ever before. It's hard to break through the noise. One of the things we've been talking about quite a lot recently is the importance of really good content, or the importance of creating good content to supply, to sort of promote your events. So if you've got the capabilities to make a video, which we all have these days, right? We've got a cell phone with a camera on it, or we've got a Zoom link with a camera on it. Go ahead and just record yourself talking to the screen for a little bit. Ironically, I did this last night for our event coming up next week. It took a few times. It took about an hour, to be honest, by the time I got over myself a little bit. But it's just a new form and a different way of people can engage with you. At the same time, if you have the budget or resource, try some social spend, or try some Google spend, on Google AdWords to help elevate you above the noise a little bit and get out to new audiences. Really sort of low-hanging fruit way is kind of what I was saying before, which is you've got this, every charity who solicits donation will have a core subset of donors who donate regularly, engage regularly. They're your super users, your core users, your big fans, and they'll be your biggest flag bearers at the same time. So if you can sort of ignite them and get them to spread the message on your behalf, again, to tap into that user-generated content sphere where you get them to create content for you, and you just host it on your platform and send it out to wider reaches. That's another way to be more authentic, be more real, and engage with other people. I mean, marketing is essentially about making emotional connections, and one of the best ways to do that is to be real and authentic. So I'd look into any sort of avenue like that can help you sort of elevate that. And exactly. All right, next question. They keep jumping all over. Sorry, I'm trying to keep up with them. What are the most popular types of virtual events? I think we've chatted about that a little bit already. So I think a lot of that, Dara, are a lot of the answer to that we'll find in the chat. We covered that a little bit earlier. This is a great question from Paul. How do you see virtual events working once COVID is over? Do you think people will be as interested in virtual events once we're able to attend in-person events again?
Absolutely. What we've been finding, again, and we work with charities and with the membership sector, is that every organization that we've worked with and talked to who's done a virtual event has said, this is something we're going to do going forward. Whether we have in-person events, we're always going to have a virtual component to it. And that is to to broaden their reach, to accommodate participants who can't travel to events, and to really get out there and expand their efforts. Every single organization that we talk to says we are going to always have a virtual component to our events going forward.
Yeah, I think they're here to stay. Absolutely, and I don't think that's not to say physical events won't any longer have their place. I don't think that's the case, but you know, there was actually quite a few charities, us included, who started the virtual event. We actually had a go at virtual events back at sort of the back end of last year, and there was a few, you know, fundraising everywhere came about around the same time who were, you know, virtual event focused as well. So it was being thought of. We've kind of been ushered into it a bit quicker than expected, as we have with lots of things at the minute. But I think once a lot like The Office and everything like that, things will change. And it'll change for good, right? And we'll be a lot more communicative online. We'll be a lot more confident in what we do, and we'll start to see a lot more success from it, I think. I think as we progress, so will the tech. You know, we'll be figuring out ways to create those sort of same levels of exhibitions and connection and sort of engagement as we go. Something I know RD Mobile has already quite well with the app and everything else. So I think it can only be a good thing, really. As we do go forward into, dare I say, the new normal again. This is a good question from Maria. Is there a way to run some of the activities in different formats for those unable to or unwilling to join online? For instance, things that can be printed and sent in the post. Do charities who offer donor newsletters include postal as well as digital versions?
I don't have really the experience to have a good answer to that, but I will say that, and this predated the coronavirus, and the current situation is that we were finding that in some instances using postal mail was a way to stand out in some cases. I don't have a good answer to that, though, as far as, you know, what things will look like going forward. There are the expenses with postal mail, and the beauty of social and email is that you can you don't have those big expenses. But I don't know, Chris, if you have a better answer for that one.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen any charity do this specifically, but a great example, and I only know of this because I actually purchased something like this for Father's Day for my dad, was you can get those sort of virtual detective series things that you send out in the post, and it does still have a virtual component to it where you might have to, you know, go online and find a code or plug in a DVD or something like that. But there's always ways to be more creative if you have a, you know, non-digital savvy or non-tech savvy audience. There is, you know, again, speak to them, see what they are willing to get involved in. As I said, I haven't seen anything specific, but I know, you know, the commercial sector does stuff like this where they're interacting with people through post. I think Katie makes a good point. That comes with its other costs and all that associated. But I would do a bit more research, have a look at other sectors, see what they're doing. The sort of stay-at-home murder mystery thing's a good one. What else is a good one? What was big before escape rooms? That was another sort of thing that was you know, was blown up before COVID, and they can no longer do that. But some of them have adapted really well to do sort of, you know, inside your own house sort of versions where they send you something via post. Yeah, have a look. I think there's some good ideas that could probably get the think tank jogging a little bit.
And I will add one thing, and that's what we saw with Johns Hopkins, is that don't assume that your older supporters are less technologically savvy, because with Johns Hopkins, they found that they had much more engagement with their older supporters. and that was a virtual event. And so I think certainly this time people are becoming more technologically savvy. So don't discount, older supporters thinking that they don't understand technology, because they do, and they're learning how to more and more.
Great, yeah, great note. I think everybody's evolving on at the minute. So great point. Question from Kate English. This might be more one for the group, but I just want to float it out there anyways. I'm interested to know if anyone is a venue and has managed virtual events. Considering the one thing that Kate's organization does they actually can't do. Have you had any experience with venues, Kate?
No, that's a question that we've heard before. Are there like hubs where you can organize virtual events where people come to the hub and participate? And I don't have experience with that, so I don't have a good answer. But I've heard the question before.
Yeah, I wonder if there's anybody else on the chat function. We haven't. Mimi actually, who's back of the house, might know a better answer to this, but feel free to chime in, Mimi, if you do. But I'm not sure. She has a lot of friends that work in the event space. But if you're in the chat and happen to know that, then please get in. The chat has been so active today that we're going to actually send a transcript out of it as well. So you all will get a version of that, just for your reference also. John asks, how do you address issues around data capture and GDPR in setting up virtual events?
Well, that's a very good question, and something that is not unlike how you deal with it normally. I think if you're using Eventbrite for registrations, that's something where you need to make sure you're protecting that data. If you are running a virtual event using a mobile app, you can lock that down if you'd like to, only to registered participants. You can lock different aspects of it down as well. You can make available or not a directory of other supporters who are participating at the event. So those are things that, just as you would with an in-person event, you want to make sure that you're aware of the issues around GDPR and privacy.
Yeah, good. Thanks very much for that. Pete asks, how can our events go global in different countries? I think it's quite a loaded question. I think that one, Pete. It kind of depends, and I don't often like giving it depends answers, but it depends on numerous factors from my point of view. If do you have an audience in those specific countries? Do you have mechanisms to reach out to people in those specific countries? And then if those two are a yes, then treat it like any other event. But you'll obviously need to factor in cultural references and all that sort of thing as you kind of do that. But if you don't have audiences in those, you probably want to look to build that first before you start sort of rummaging down that route.
One thing that we did that was really fun with a virtual event recently, it was an organization in the UK, and we talked to them about, well, why don't we see if we can pull together some US participants who are in similar industries to connect with one another. So that turned out to be very, very successful. Is we just reached out to our network here in the US and said, there's this great event going on. They really want to connect their members with execs in the US. And so we actually had several sessions that were very successful, where we did breakout groups and connected UK and US participants with one another. And so that was very successful.
Great, thanks for adding that. No, that sounds like it. Simon asks a really good question. I'll try and wrap up a little bit. He says, it seems like most charities dip their toes in, the simple interactive donation campaigns, like, donate and add a selfie of you donating, or, choose a song that, links up with your donation. And then they use that confidence to launch a more complex virtual campaign like Step Challenge or Cycle Marathon. He's kind of asking, at what point can you make that realization that you should scale from something that's quite small scale to something that's the size of an event, from a fundraising point of view, which again is it's a great question, and it kind of how long is a piece of string one, but I thought it's definitely worth asking.
I think this is a time where people are taking chances and trying new things. I think a lot depends on what your staffing looks like and what your volunteering looks like as far as who could support your efforts to put on an event like that. But you know, this is a time where there's a lot of innovation happening and a lot of opportunity.
Yeah, I totally agree. There's no time like the present when it comes to seeing this, especially if you have to kind of call back to some of the earlier points made, especially if you have that core user base there as well. Kind of using some of the promotion techniques we talked about earlier, you can use them to amplify whatever message you're trying to send. So I think it's just a case of, poor planning, good planning prevents poor performance. Give it some thought, spend a week really brainstorming it out, hashing it out, figuring it out, and then give it a whirl.
Yeah.
Essentially, that's probably the best advice.
I think we have a tendency to overthink some of these things in our normal lives, and this is a chance to try something new.
And learn. I think that's the most important thing as you go, and use the data that you collect from those to learn more about your events, learn who's coming, who enjoyed, who didn't enjoy. If you can see any sort of trends in the data that's showing that, and that'll inform your decisions more quicker and easier as you go forward as well. I think that's a really good point. Annie asks, we're down to the last few questions now. Annie asks, out of interest, have you ever seen anyone create incentives with virtual events, certificates, medals, that sort of thing? Has it worked well?
Yes. So with the Mattie Miracle Walk, what they did do was they had prizes for the most steps people took. So people were wearing step counters or carrying a mobile device where they were tracking their steps. So they did use some incentives there. They also did team challenges where they had different teams competing against one another for fundraising, who can fundraise the most. So those are things that the Mattie Miracle Cancer Foundation used.
That's great. Thank you. Simon asks, has there been any experience of interacting with teens and families that works well? I know we have a really good article about engaging with millennials, and we actually, the last webinar we ran 2 weeks ago was about fundraising as well, and that spoke quite heavily about marketing to millennials, which is I'd recommend going back and watching. We can include it in the comms after this. I don't know if you've seen anything, Katie.
Yeah, so with the two organizations that I talked about today, Johns Hopkins actually included family activities in their virtual alumni weekend, because typically families will return to the campus of the university and they'll bring their kids of varying ages. So they always have to have activities for families and for kids. So they did science, as part of their virtual weekend, they did science activities. They did they did cooking demonstrations that could involve families and kids. And they did an activity where you're building, I think it was a toy building activity where you pull together things that you had in your home to build things. Yeah. So those are some examples. And then with Mattie Miracle, if you notice the photos, the social media images that were shown, they're all levels of family participated in that event.
Great. Thank you for that. And last question is a follow-up from Paul, who asked the great question before, which was forward planning for events. How long does it appear that people are planning virtual events for? So have you come across any that have a physical event in place yet, or is it still fully virtual at the minute?
So here in the US, I would say that the fall events are definitely in question. A lot of organizations have rescheduled their spring events to the fall, but I think that they're all making making plans to incorporate a virtual component or potentially make it all virtual. So one of the organizations that we work with is American Society of Association Executives. So they're an association for people that run associations. They're not gonna have any, and they have hundreds of events throughout the year. They're not gonna have any in-person events through the end of the year, as far as I know. That's what I understand from them. So I'm not sure what it's looking like there, but that's what I'm hearing, is nobody is planning anything impersonal, anything in person through the end of the year.
Yeah, we're kind of taking that stance as well. We've got another virtual event in October time, which we're sticking with is virtual, but we're all being well, we're still planning next year's conference to be physical. So it'll be more digital 2021.
Yeah.
We're still planning for that to be in person, all being well. I think you've just got to take it as every day is at a time, haven't you?
Yeah, many large companies are prohibiting travel by their employees too until even next spring. So yeah, I think that says something there.
Exactly. No, I think it's very much a just wait and see type of game when it comes to that. Keep virtual front of mind for the time being.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Katie, you've been absolutely fantastic. Thank you very much for joining us and getting up early to deliver an amazing webinar. Incredible. Thank you very much. And to all you at home, thank you very much for joining us and sticking with us for an extended Q&A, but some fabulous questions and great interaction in the chat as well. As we said, resources and feedback will be available after the webinar. So, resources will be available after the webinar. We'll send out the recording, slides, the chat transcript as well, because there was some great stuff being said in there. And anything that we mentioned that was of value to you as well, we'll also include. You'll be able to find it on our website in the next few days, and it'll also hit your inboxes as well. If you wouldn't mind, we do send out a feedback form. If you could spend 2 minutes just filling that in, let us know how we do, how we can be better, so we can continuously improve the way we deliver these webinars and bring more value to you as you engage with us. That'd be greatly appreciated. Coming up, the only thing on the agenda is Digital Leadership Day. So if that is something of interest, we really would recommend going in and checking it out. There's lots of great topics on the day, lots of great speakers, and some fun networking going to be involved in the end in there. So head over to the website or the link in the chat, and we'll send and sign up. So thank you all again. I hope the weather's getting a little bit nicer for everybody. We'll see you very soon. Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Bye.